appreciate those sharing before me because, of course, I have the benefit of being like, oh, yeah, that too. Um, I just posted a video in the Slack channel for the group. It's a 10-minute video. It's so beautifully done. It's 10 minutes on childhood trauma and the relationship to addiction. And it's a Gabor Mate talk, and there's illustrations that go along with it. And it's just so beautifully done. 10 minutes, it just really captures it, I think. So he's a go-to for me in the realm of Hungry Ghost to me, just completely sort of helped me understand that. And so anyway, I just want to put that out there. But in that talk, he noted something that I'd never heard before. Made a lot of sense to me. The difference between trauma and traumatic. The events are traumatic. Trauma is what I carry inside of me, right? And that was just like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. Traumatic are the things that happened or didn't happen, but trauma is what I carry inside of me. So yeah, and a lot of what we think about, I think, in terms of childhood trauma are all the bad things that happened. But I mean, and I want to say this as a truism because I think it is, but I always hesitate just a little bit. But whenever there is something, bad things that are happening, there's things that inherently are not happening that need to happen. So we talk about abuse and neglect. When we hear, I mean, some of my fellow travelers, the horrific sort of types of abuse, I mean, just horrific. But the underlying piece of also what didn't happen was attunement and a sense of connection and a sense of being seen and felt and heard and validated. And I go right to the idea of trust too. We have the don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. That idea that I was taught not to trust myself. And in doing that, I was taught that no one else is trustworthy either, which makes me feel very, very alone. So how do you even talk or describe about this and this stuff? And the thing I think what I'm seeing is that there are multiple languages that can be used, and even within our program, there's psychological sort of speak that we can use to describe trauma. There is biological and physiological descriptions of what happens in the body. We can talk about it from spiritual perspectives. And all of those, I think, are beautiful signs that point to something that is really just hard to sort of even hold within myself as an understanding and to be able to talk about with one another. So there's these sort of multiple different languages, I think. And for me, I'm a pretty smart guy, and I like to have sort of the multiple languages. That makes a lot of sense to me. I really have studied this from biological perspectives and neurochemistry that's changing in my body, as well as philosophical, spiritual sort of perspectives of what's happening to, an embodiment of my humanness versus, I mean, I'm an MSW student to be a clinician, so different trauma theory and psychologically what's happening and parts perspectives, reparenting. All of these things to me are like pointing at something that happens, and to me it's an innate wound. A trauma is a wound, and wound, I think, has a more visceral sort of something that I relate to, that there's a wound that I'm carrying. But I also understand it as something that, it can be a wound that's inflicted with some, you're in a plane crash and it completely sort of ruptures something and adjusts the physiology and adjusts a philosophical perspective. But what we're talking about in our program predominantly is something that happened over time, and something that created a biochemistry sort of place within me, a spiritual perspective, a mode of thinking of psychology that reflects that wound and a way of seeing the world from that wounded perspective. And to me, that's about carrying the trauma. And there's a million different ways to talk about it, but so yeah, it's about as much of what didn't happen as what did happen. And the Gabor Mate video shows that, and attachment theory looks at that. We are born into this world. Humans are born into this world small, needy, helpless, and dependent. And if we don't have someone reliable to attach to, who we can trust, our world is going to be very unsafe. And we will carry that perspective into the rest of our lives. And so I go back into that original attachment theory stuff as far as what is needed and what breeds trauma or breeds this wound. And the core of it is don't trust, in my perspective. So I also think that healing trauma, to me, it has to be a comprehensive shift of physiology, psychology, spirituality, and it can only happen at a very slow incremental pace, a consistent pace. It has to happen that way. There's no other way. There's no quick thing that fixes it. It's a reshifting, a coming to a new neurochemistry, a new neurology. It has to happen, and it has to happen very slowly. And I did my talk anyway, I did another talk, and for me, I put in that talk, to me, it's a combination. I've talked with Charlie about this too. It's a combination of desensitization and resensitization. It's desensitizing from the stimuli that create those automated reactions within me. Whatever the trigger is, I have to desensitize to that trigger. At the same time, I have to resensitize to bring all my feelings and sensations and connecting into those body sensations online. And it can only happen so fast. So, they used to do trauma healing exposure therapy, right? No, we just throw you into there and you'll get over it. No, that doesn't rewire the chemistry. It has to be a slow, incremental trust building process. And that trust building process has to be fundamentally started inside, which I believe is becoming my own loving parent. And it has to be inside. That trust building has to be repaired inside. And then it shifts how I trust outside. Um, yeah. And I think with the trust too, the don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. Um, the fundamental way that I learn to trust myself is through my feelings and connecting to my needs. And I think that's why that statement of learning to talk, trust, and feel is so important, and why it captures so much in our program. And so, yeah, I guess the last piece I would say is also within attachment theory. We hear about good enough parenting. We also hear about back to match. That to bring a child who is in distress and feeling discomfort back to match is what the job of a loving parent is. To reconnect to that child in that place of distress and learn how that they can help bring them out of that, and teaching a human how to do that for him or herself. And so, coming back to a place of homeostasis, that we will always be thrown off, by different things, but learning to sort of come back to a place of centeredness and connection, internal sense of connection. So that's my however many 7-10 minute talk on my idea of trauma. And I guess I just one other thing. My history. I've shared a lot that in these last 4 to 5 years, I was on antidepressants and tranquilizers for 25 years of my life. And so in the same time I was doing my ACA recovery, I was also doing a detox of a lot of different, also nicotine, also alcohol, also caffeine. And so those two things are very intertwined for me too. And addictions and trauma go hand in hand. And I really like how that Gabor Mate video really sort of illustrates how that works. So again, there's a detox process and there's a physiology I know of what I was experiencing these past few years of going to those very difficult places. I'll never know how much of that was chemical shifts in my body from an external chemical perspective versus the ACA internal drugstore and the shifting that's been going on with that. To me, they just went hand in hand. And it has been a very intense ride, and I'm glad I survived it. I'm glad I'm here today, and I'm glad I'm not in that place. And when I need to go back to the painful places, I've learned how to do that. And so I think too, resiliency is another piece of what we talk about with trauma. To learn how to become our own loving parent, but how to bring ourselves back to match, and how to go to the difficult places, learn to sit with discomfort, but learn how to move out of it also. So thanks.